What we learned with President Trump backing off from his threats on April 7th is that he's still focused on the midterm election in the US, basically trying to salvage the Senate for the Republican Party. That means, and as long as that's the case, that he really needs to tamp down the oil price and he needs to tamp down the economic shock and he needs to negotiate with Iran. But as soon as the election is over, that can change, and the Iranians know that.
Matt Gertken, welcome to the business. It's day two of a fragile ceasefire. Markets yesterday bet this could be an off-ramp from the conflict. Markets are not so convinced today.
No, I think there's been a very slow crawl. Basically, there's probably more activity going on than is tracked by the official data sources. But generally speaking, there's just not a firm belief that the ceasefire is credible. And you need to have more of a trickle turn into more of a stream over time. And that requires the countries to demonstrate that they're not going to be attacking shipping. And that may take a few days.
So what is the state of play in the Strait of Hormuz? At the moment, we know Iran's essentially in control. Are ships getting through?
In general, you're starting to see things creep up, and there's a big backlog, and there's a lot of there's a lot of shipping that's stuck inside the Persian Gulf. There's a lot of ships that want to get in. The incentive to do so is very high, and there is a framework now that's at least trying to get started. And so I think we'll see more captains willing to go through. It's just taking time. And of course, if there's any ships that are struck, like with Iran saying they're threatening to hit ships if they don't have permission, well, that'll restart the whole process and slow everything down again to a crawl.
And we know that Iran wants to impose a toll on ships going through as much as $2 million. I mean, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Singapore have all made noise that they won't either negotiate with Iran or operate under its terms. So when it comes to having the strait open as it was pre-war, it's going to be pretty tough, isn't it?
Yeah, ultimately that kind of situation is unacceptable. It's an international waterway, and so many countries have an interest in getting traffic flowing through there. And they won't accept the idea that Iran is the sovereign power over this waterway. And the question is whether the Iranians will really enforce this. They're claiming this authority, but will they enforce it? Will they shoot ships that don't have permission? Will they use drones to harass ships? If they do, then effectively there is no ceasefire, because that was the whole point of what the president was offering, was to say, let's clear up the strait and we'll stop attacking Iran. That would be derailed if they do enforce this claim that you have to go through their routes, their toll, and pay that toll and also get permission ahead of time.
The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says there's plenty of oil on the spot market and he's heading to Singapore to shore up Australian supplies. How does this spot market work?
Well, what we know is that the combined inventories of the OECD countries, the non-OECD countries, the strategic petroleum reserves that like the U.S. has and other countries have, these can provide a period of 6 months, maybe even a year, in just the raw amount that's being lost through the Strait of Hormuz when it's mostly shuttered. But the issue is that then you're drawing down inventories around the world, and the markets respond to that. And of course, the other thing is that the subsidiary, the refined product, the subsidiary forms of oil that are used in fuel, well, those have really been skyrocketing. And so there's just a whole backlog, and it's not going to be cleared up for several months, even in the best case where the ceasefire is operating.
Do you think the ceasefire is going to last the 2 weeks? I mean, the points of contention are obviously the Strait of Hormuz, and the US really wants an end to Iran's missiles and nuclear program.
Generally speaking, the Strait of Hormuz is the key thing. What we learned with President Trump backing off from his threats on April 7th is that he's still focused on the midterm election in the US, basically trying to salvage the Senate for the Republican Party. That means, and as long as that's the case, that he really needs to tamp down the oil price and he needs to tamp down the economic shock and he needs to negotiate with Iran. But as soon as the election is over, that can change, and the Iranians know that, and so there's not a lot of faith in this discussion. But that's the signal we've got right now, and it does imply that he'll continue to try to make this ceasefire work.
Well, markets have really been banking on the taco trade, and Trump has consistently chickened out from his big threats. Is this another case in point of that?
It depends on your point of view because I do agree that he's sensitive to that very bad opinion polling at home and the election consequences which are shifting against his party. So that's true. He effectively opted for negotiations here. But it's also true that the U.S. dropped massive ordnance penetrator bombs on military bunkers the weekend before and conducted strikes on Karg Island against military targets. So I wouldn't say that it was purely a case of ramping up rhetoric and then not doing anything. I would say that he did bring the Iranians to the table, and they're not eager to have more core elements of their military or their regime knocked out through further attacks. And that's another reason for thinking that over the next few months, the ceasefire, as shaky as it is, might actually prevail. It's really when we get down the road, and particularly around the midterm election or afterwards, that I'm afraid the whole thing could fall apart, simply because the president's incentives change as soon as the election is over.
Matt Gertken, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alicia.